we can move to the next speaker. So it's a pleasure for me to introduce Dr. Silvia Rigato. She is currently in maternity leave, so she sent us her pre-recorded talk, but she will join us for the Q&A session. So Silvia Rigato, after obtaining her bachelor and master's degree in the developmental psychology from the University of Padova, Italy, Silvia moved to London for pursuing her PhD at the Centre for Brain and Cognitive Development, Birkbeck College, London. Her research in developmental cognitive neuroscience focuses on how the infant's brain responds to social and perceptual stimuli, how these responses change over time, and how they are influenced by prenatal environment and postnatal experiences. She works as a senior lecturer at the University of Essex, where she set up the Essex Baby Lab for studying child development and co-founded the multidisciplinary group From the Womb to the World to bridge the gap between lab-based research and the community of parents and professionals. So today she is going to talk about the development of baby body representation.
Hello. Thanks to Martina and Francesca to organize this amazing conference. I'm sorry I can't be there in person today, but thanks for letting me record and send the talk instead. Just to introduce very briefly what I will be talking about in a minute is about the development of body representations in infancy. In particular, I will be focusing on an integrative account that suggests that it is through daily multisensory experiences that infants are able to start putting together information coming from the different senses and then gradually develop multisensory representations of their own body. Okay, so here's my talk on the development of baby body representations. Before I start going into detail of this, let me acknowledge and thank my collaborators and friends on this project, Carina De Klerk and Maria Laura Filippetti, both lecturers at the University of Essex as well. So we recently actually suggested an associative learning account of the development of body representations, which I'm going to talk about during this talk. And so this is one topic that I think put us all together today here at this conference. We are really interested to know how babies start to represent their own body. We know that the literature is quite mixed. Some evidence points out that it's quite early, that bodies start to do that, they have this ability. However, there are also other evidences that instead suggest that it's not before the first year of life or so that more advanced body representations develop. We know that it's really important from the beginning of life to be able to represent our own body because that enables us to interact with the world, with the environment around us. So that's why we're really interested in this topic, and we made this suggestion of an integrative account. What we actually suggest, similarly to other associative learning account, is that infants need daily multisensory experience to form associations between the unimodal signals to be able for these unisensory body representations to become multisensory. So how does this work is that the kind of learning that leads to more coherent body representation occurs when there is correlated excitation of the sensory neurons that represent a certain body part. For example, when an infant sees her hand touching an object, the correlated excitation of the visual, tactile, and proprioceptive sensory neurons increases the strength of these connections between them, so that subsequent excitation of one of these types of sensory neurons can lead to co-activation of the others. So basically, we we suggest that it is when infants observe themselves while they touch their body or external object, this facilitates the development of multisensory body representations. And in fact, they have a lot of daily opportunities to make this kind of experiences, of multisensory experiences, not only in the postnatal period, but already in the womb. We know that touch, for example, is the first sense to develop, and they also start to move quite early. So they already, when they are in the uterine, the ward environment, they start touching around, but also their own body. And this is, and for example, we know, you can see in this picture here, the baby is already sucking the thumb as well, or they are in touch with the uterine wall anyway, so they are getting some feedback as well. So while they are perceiving their own body, they are also moving. And in the postnatal period, obviously they are exposed to other senses as well, like visual. So infants are looking at themselves, so they have opportunities to look at their own face, for example, but also to look at the body parts that they are touching in a particular time. Or also they are looking at objects that they are reaching and touching. So all of these are sources of multisensory bodily information that help them to develop multisensory representations of their own body. What are the evidence from the literature that indicate how and when babies develop representations of their body? So we know that one of the key processes in the development of infants' first body representation is their ability to detect contingencies between multisensory information. Maria Laura Filippetti had these studies a few years ago where she shows that newborns already are able to show a different response to visual displays of an infant face being stroked at the same time or a different time to the tactile stimulation they are receiving themselves. And this was a behavioral study of looking time. A previous study by Rocha and Striano also showed that from 4 months of age, infants show different response when they observe a specular image of their own face compared to that of another infant. And again, this is suggesting that they are able to detect the contingency between visual, motor, and proprioceptive information generated by their own action. Similarly, previous studies as well show that infants at 5 months are able to match the proprioceptive information generated by their own performed limb movements to those observed on a video display. And even more recently, there are evidence showing that at the same age, 5 months, infants are also able to demonstrate, to localize vibrotactile stimulation on their limbs. Basically showing their ability to combine and to merge tactile and proprioceptive information. These early competencies are thought to rely on the infant's abilities to match one sensory modality to another. However, it's possibly more advanced body representations that needs to develop in order to have better representations of the body. And these include expectations about the typical structure or configuration of the body as well as the typical proportions. And in fact, in the literature, there are some evidence that these develop later on in infancy. For example, there are a bunch of studies by Virginia Slaughter and Heron that shows that it's not before 15 months of age that infants are able to differentiate between pictures of typical and scrambled adult body configurations. However, it's also true that they found that this process can be facilitated when human bodies are used in their experiments or even mannequins. In line with this later development of body representations, quite recently I conducted a study with Helge Gilmeister, also at Essex, where we presented infants with images of bodies, upright and inverted, and we recorded brain activation with EEG. And we found that it was not before 14 months of age that there was evidence of a differential neurosignature of body processing in the infants when they observed upright versus inverted body. So the first signs of neural difference was not before 14 months. We also had 10 months olds in that study, and we couldn't see any difference in the body in the processing of body configuration there. However, previous studies also indicate that quite early, much earlier than what we found, at 3 months of age, 3.5 months of age, there was also, infants already showed some differences in how they processed distorted and intact bodies, as well as faces. So this was a study by Gliga and Han Lamberts. And also there is a behavioral study by Sieber which found that babies are able to, at 5 months, are able to discriminate between proportioned and disproportioned bodies. So you can see in this image is here a stretched bodies that they were able to differentiate, to discriminate. However, it was only under some methodological constraints of being first familiarized to the disproportional bodies rather than the typical one. So what are all of these evidences really telling us is that infants relatively early on in life already have expectations about the first order structure of bodies, so they have an idea, let's say, of how a body is structured. However, this kind of expectation might be quite fragile and also dependent on how closely the stimuli resemble the bodies that infants observe in daily life. And in fact, all of these studies, they all used adult bodies, which of course babies have a lot of visual exposure with since the very beginning of life. However, what we are investigating in a study is how infants' representation of their own bodies follow a similar trajectories as that of a developmental, expectation of a human adult bodies. And as far as we know, this hasn't been really studied, especially in young babies. And how this is linked to our account. What we would expect is that the accumulated multisensory experience, so visual, motor, and proprioceptive experience that infants obtain when they observe their own full body would be critical for the development of their ability to form expectation about their own body's configuration and proportions. So similarly to the fact that they might need to have a lot of exposure to adult body to develop general body representations of an adult body, they might also need to accumulate experiences with their own body to form expectation about the development of their own body, about the configuration and proportion of their own body. So our ongoing experiment is a look-in time experiments that we are running through the online platform Lookit. We've been testing or collecting data, more than testing, data from 5 and 9 months old infants. even though I have to say we haven't finished data collection. We presented them with images of upright and inverted infant bodies, which were typical and proportionally distorted. So you can see here again how one of these body in the picture is stretched. We had upright and inverted bodies as a control. And here is Maria Laura with the little one to take part in the study. So we presented infants with these images and we recorded their looking behavior. So what we were expecting is that if it's true that multisensory experience with one's own body helps the development of expectations about typical body proportions, then we would expect to find a preference for the upright normal over the disproportional infant body, only on those infants who have accumulated more experience with their own body. So with the 9 months, but not the 5 months. We expect the 9-month-old infants to, for example, be able to crawl or to locomote in some ways that infants do at that age already, while we are not expecting a lot of movements or experience with their own body at 5 months, when it is usually the age when they start at least to sit up, but not to move around yet in general. We were collecting information from the parents as well, whether infants were crawling, and if so, since when, so how many weeks they were crawling, they started crawling for. Okay, so preliminary analysis with basically the full data set of the 5 months, but only 13 out of 23 9-month-olds showed us no significant differences between conditions. So basically infants at 5 and 9 months looked equally at the body stimuli, so they're not showing any difference. So as what we are seeing here is that maybe these findings are not really supporting our hypothesis that accumulated multisensory experience with the whole body facilitates a preference for upright typical body at 9 months, where we were expecting to see a difference. However, is that what's we are really saying, or there is another question out of this study. So is that maybe they still don't have accumulated enough experience with their own body, or it's not possibly the right kind of experience. So maybe crawling is not enough, and it's just too at the beginning at 9 months of age to have enough experience with their own body. So we think that while infants at this age at 9 months have accumulated enough visual exposure with adult bodies, they may need additional experience with their own body in order to show a preference for an infant body, or to have this expectation of the right or the typical structure of an infant body. So what we are starting now is collect data from older infants who are already able to at least stand or cruise or even walk, so between 12 and 14 months of age. And we are expecting them to show some difference there. And that's because obviously they will have a few more months of experience with their own body standing and walking around, or as I said, crawling and so on. Also some more visual exposure of their own body in its entirety. So they will be able to have seen their body in the mirror, for example, standing. So that should hopefully help them to have this more multisensory and integrated representation of their own body. So I have not possibly answered any of the questions that we have, but please watch this space for any updates on this project. And thanks again for listening and for inviting me to give this talk. Thank you. Bye.
Okay, here we are. Thank you, Silvia, for your amazing and interesting talk. I just spoke with Silvia, and unfortunately, she can't join us for the Q&A session. She's extremely and suddenly busy with her little one born few weeks ago. So I think that we all can understand and emphasize with her, especially in this session where we are talking and we are interested in how the development occurs. So we can for sure understand that she is busy, but she will be delighted to answer to all your questions. So please, if you have any comments or curiosity, write down in the chat, and we will send all your questions to her in the next days. I probably have just a comment. We all hope that you can find a difference or some significant results adding older infants in the study. Actually, in a way, it could reinforce the associative learning account hypothesis, because it means that we need, as she said, specific motor, especially motor experience to acquire a whole and complete experience of our home body, and so probably it will be very helpful to see differences in these different age ranges. And I really appreciate the fact that prenatal life, as so many times yesterday in the evening, comes out in the conversation between Siri Husvet and Anna Chaunica. So the prenatal lives seems to acquire really a very importance and a matter in our topic. So the prenatal experiences that we know are so crucial for the very early beginning of our implicit sense of self, bodily related, is now one of our main time period to explore. So thank you again, Silvia, and please write down any question in the chat. We will send them to her.